Good morning, you skinny, cross-eyed creep. And they laughed. Every morning I walked into elementary school, it was the same. Madam Contest Toastmaster, I was skinny, and I have pictures to prove it. Toastmasters and friends, I was cross-eyed. And having a left eye that tried to hide behind my nose probably made me look pretty creepy. And having only one eye meant that I could not throw or catch or hit a ball like a normal boy. But I wasn't the only one they ridiculed. There was Larry Eklund. Larry's father was a traveling magician. But magic didn't help Larry the day he fell to the playground writhing with an epileptic seizure. They laughed. And I laughed. And then there was Margaret Crossman. She was born without thumbs. She was the smartest girl in class, but when we had fire drills and you had to leave the school 2 by 2 walking hand in hand, nobody wanted to hold Margaret's hand. And when she wrote on the blackboard, she looked funny. And they and I laughed. Despite the fact that I hated being ridiculed by them, I was becoming one of them. Oh yes, they ridiculed us because we were different, and we were different. But we all had one thing in common. The thing in common that all human beings have. The need we have that once we are placed in the arms of our mother right after our birth, the need for love. And when they jeered us, we felt unloved. In the 4th grade, Mrs. Banner asked us to write a story. And then she picked out the best one and she read it. It was great. It was exciting. And it wasn't mine. And when she finished, she said, that story was written by Larry Eklund. Larry. At recess, I sought out Larry, and I said, where did you come up with that story? He says, oh, I have stories all the time. And thereafter, we met every day at recess, and Larry would tell me a different story every day. And slowly, he taught me how to tell stories. One day he said, why don't you come over to my house tonight and we'll trade comics? And I went over to his house, and after we traded, his father brought out a big box. And he put Larry in the box with his head out one end and his shoes out the other. And then he sawed Larry in half. Really? I saw it with my own eye. Then he pulled the pieces apart, and Larry's head kept talking. And then he pulled the pieces back together, and Larry jumped out laughing, and he slapped me on the back. And every day my mom would pack my lunch in my Superman lunchbox. And I'd go sit on a bench all by myself and eat. And one day, Margaret Crossman sat down next to me. What was I to do? Should I leave? Should I look at her hands? What? And she said, do you want half of my brownie? And it was yummy. And I gave her half of my sugar cookie. And thereafter, for 2 or 3 days every week, we'd have lunch together and talk and laugh. In the 5th grade, I got a paper route. And the route consisted of 117 houses and the girls' dormitory at the Clarion State Teachers College. And that was the start of my college education. At the end of the first month, it became time to collect the $1.25 for the papers. And I knocked on one door, and Margaret Crossman answered the door. And she said, "Charlie, what are you doing here?" I said, "I'm collecting for the paper." And her mother called from the kitchen. She says, "Margie, the money's on the table. Give it to him." And she scooped it up. And she handed it to me. And there was a dime tip. The biggest tip I ever got. It was 2 candy bars. About 6 months later, I went to the house, and both Mrs. Crossman and Margaret answered the door. And Mrs. Crossman said, "Charlie, we're not going to need the paper anymore. We're moving to Oil City." And Margaret scooped up the money, and she gave it to me, and she walked out onto the porch with me. And she said, "I want to thank you for being my friend. I'm going to miss you." I'll never forget that day. Ladies and gentlemen, there has not been a human being living who at some point in life has felt unloved. And even now, sitting out here next to you, there are people who are hurting. And all it takes from you is to listen to their stories and hold their hand, and maybe you'll get a friend. Madam.